Okay, doke. So we're just after 1 o'clock. So look, we'll kick off. So you're all very welcome once again to day 3 of PastureBase Week 2023, the ultimate PastureBase preparation for 2023 grazing season. My name is Joseph Dunphy, and again, I'm delighted to be joined by John, my Grass10 colleague, John Douglas. So on today's schedule for day 3, we're going to following on from yesterday in terms of maybe when we looked at, doing a bit on the wedges. We're going to look more in detail at the PastureBase grass wedge. And, we're going to maybe discuss some of the targets for the spring, the summer and the autumn for both, dry stock, beef and sheep and the dairy side of the house as well. So where you should be when you're completing your weekly wedges at the different times of year, what should be the KPIs that I'm looking out for? Am I on the money, or have I to make adjustments to my grazing plan for the week? Then after we go through some of that information, we'll be heading back to PastureBase again and going through some of the features there that PastureBase can help you there, especially throughout the middle of the grazing season, in terms of using the projected planner to run scenarios for your farm throughout the grazing season, and then looking at PastureBase. So in the middle of the grazing season, making decisions off the wedge. So when you have your wedge there, making a decision, maybe putting fields into long-term silage, short-term silage, adjusting supplementation rates. We're going to be looking at that. Okay. So just, I suppose, firstly, to begin, we just want to bring you back to the website for 2 minutes. So again, just to remind you and to show you. So again, if you're going to get to the Grass10 page off the website, you can obviously search Teagasc Grass10. But if you hit crops up here in the top bar, over here on the right hand side, you'll see Grass10. Click into Grass10. Webinars subsection here on the left hand side, and the PastureBase week is here already. Okay, so you can see Monday the 16th, the recording is already here for PastureBase week. So as we go through the week, there'll be the 5 videos will be embedded as they as they become available for uploading, and they link back onto YouTube. Okay, so just to make yourselves aware, or anyone maybe, that we've had a number of questions in with numerous emails on for looking for the recordings. They're all available there on the Grass10 page, okay, on the Teagasc public website. So
yeah, just to say again, just for questions and answers, the Q&A function is open. The chat function, I think, should also be working. So if you have any questions on what we're going through today, or things we went through yesterday or the day before, please get them into the chat and we'll answer them. Okay, so now is the best time to do it because you're in the zone. So make sure and ask any questions that you have over the next 45 minutes or so. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's been brilliant, to be fair. We've had loads of questions day 1 and day 2, and a couple of questions coming in on emails afterwards and stuff like that. So that's great, because when there's questions and there's interaction, we know people are, getting an awful lot out of what we're talking about. So just going back onto some of the information that's on PastureBase, and I suppose, look, we're going to start talking about the targets for maybe the spring, summer and the autumn. But I suppose if you're not completing the number of walks that, maybe if you're only completing 10 or 15 walks during the year, there's no way really that you're going to reliably be able to make decisions on the farm. Okay, so as I said, the farm cover report again is one of the reports that, I suppose, by the end of the week we'll be showing you on PastureBase. But take, for instance, over on the left hand side of the screen here, that might be something that we would typically see from someone who we would say that's maybe doing a very average job on PastureBase in terms of measuring. They're doing in around 19 measures a year. Okay, so so if we go down through it, there's no opening cover, so there's nothing in January and February, 2 in March, okay, 2 in April, three grass measurements in May, 1 in June, another couple throughout July and August and September, a couple in October, and then nothing for the rest of the year. Okay, so in general, like 19, but I suppose where we would see the pitfalls there, and why people should aim to do, above 30 anyways, okay, is that we've no open and closing cover to kind of maybe put first of all, do a closing cover on the back end, and then doing the opening cover in the springtime allows you to measure the overwinter growth, and also make a plan then for, what sort of grass is on the farm there in the springtime. So if you complete that opening farm cover maybe in early February sometime. Not measuring weekly in April. So like in April, it's probably your most, April and the first couple of weeks in May, there's a huge, we're in a transition period from low to high growth rates. Okay. And grass can get out of control very, very fast throughout April. Okay. So it's very, very important that around that time that we intensify the amount of measuring that's done on the farm. Okay. Then in general, for that busy time there of, I suppose June, July in terms of, peak growth rates. Okay, well, May anyways in June, we need to be probably measuring 6 times a month. Okay, so we need to be nearly getting out twice a week, or definitely 3 times in every 2 weeks. Okay, because covers are changing so fast on the farm. We can have a cover of maybe 800-900, and once it gets a bit of bulk in it, then it's absolutely shooting through the roof, and it's it's at 14 or 1500 before we blink. So, and then that leads to suboptimal pre-grazing yields and lower animal performance. And then look at it, to be fair, 3 in October is good here, but we'd like to see maybe another 1 or 2 in November, especially on dairy farms that would be maybe slightly higher stocked, that they know when to put the handbrake on in terms of not skinning the farm too much in the back end. Okay, so that's just those couple of targets. That's what we would be, for anyone that's new to PastureBase today, those targets there in the middle of 32 to 38. So an opening one at the end of February or January, maybe 1 in February, a couple in March. Then we're getting back into weekly measurements in April. Okay, then probably 4 to 6, but I would be saying once every 5 days for May to July, which would be 6 a month, and then 4 in August, 3 in September, 3 in October, and a couple in the back end. So somewhere between 32 and 38 cover, 38 walks is what we'd be targeting for people to do.
There was a farmer, Joe. I think it was a Monaghan farmer actually said at one time. He said, "The more I measure the grass, the more I get it right," and that's the way it is.
Yeah. So that's just maybe something to take a picture of when you should be targeting. So again, it starts off fairly okay in the springtime and get used to it, but it's just over that mid-season, grass can get out of control very lively, and that's where PastureBase can come in to help. Okay, so quick look at the different targets for the different times of the year. Okay, so this was the wedge yesterday that we put together on PastureBase. So again, what we talk about, we'll get talking about them in a few minutes. So John was on about the farm cover, the cover per livestock unit, the growth and demand. And so what I really want to focus here is on the days ahead, okay? Because as we said in a dry stock scenario, there could be multiple groups of animals on the farm, and it can be a little bit, the different livestock units there. But what I always like to do, I like to keep it simple for people who are new to PastureBase. And if people can keep on top of the days ahead, and keep the pre-grazing yield right, they're 90 something % of the way there. Okay, so just so when you complete your weekly walk and you see their days ahead figure there, this is a very good 1-pager, okay, for beef and sheep farms to have. Okay, so the grazing targets by month for beef farms, and grazing targets by month for sheep farms. All right, so it kind of gives us there, kind of from a plate meter point of view, so the pre-grazing heights. Okay, so if we're using a plate meter, so that's that compressed sward height. Okay, that's not just centimeters of grass there. That's if you're using a plate meter and you were coming back. Okay, that you were going into those pre-grazing heights. So again, we're probably looking at somewhere in around 40 days ahead, 40 days of grass ahead. 45 days of grass ahead during the first rotation. Okay, then April. Obviously, probably similar enough in terms of maybe a slight somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500, but you can see the days ahead are coming down. Okay, so somewhere between 18 and 21 days ahead. Then over the mid-season, okay, and this is where it'll probably link back into what's happening on the dairy side as well. But in general, if we have somewhere around 12 to 14, 12 to 15 days ahead, okay, so that means, say for that, what that literally means is that if grass growth dropped to 0 on the farm today, I have somewhere between 12 and 14 days grazing. Okay. So in general, if we think of it, you probably 1/3 of your farm, or sorry, 2/3 of your farm that has grass on it, and 1/3 maybe that's grazed in the last 6 or 7 days that doesn't have any grass on it. So what we mean by days ahead, then you can probably add 7 days to that for the other third of the farm. So a days ahead figure of 12 to 14 days ahead in general will mean a 21 or 22 day grazing rotation. Okay, so when we say growing 3 weeks, grazing 3 days, okay, the 12 to 14 days ahead, and yeah, that will mean somewhere in the region of a 21, 22 day round. Okay, so that's kind of where we want to be for the summer. All right. So again, as we said, if we can keep our pre-grazing yield right in that window of 12, 13, 1400, and keep the days ahead correct. What myself and John tend to see an awful lot is we might be going to grass groups, and that figure, a days ahead figure, could be at 22 or 23, and then you add your 7 days or something like that to it. So the rotation out there on that farm is 30 days, and the pre-grazing yield has gone completely out of control. Okay, so without getting into too much detail on that, that's kind of what we're looking at, and it's quite similar again from a sheep point of view. Is again, we're just trying to manage the days ahead throughout the year, and we're trying to manage the pre-grazing yield. Okay, and we'll show then later on in terms of maybe what we can do then with surplus grass then, and how PastureBase can help to take that out. But I would that's available on the Teagasc on the Teagasc website there. That those grazing targets, and if you want to take a picture of them, they're very good to have. They're very, very simple to have. And again, what myself and John are all about today, about this week, it's how can we, it's simple grazing targets that people can be, that's very achievable for people. And if people, all they did for the mid-season was try and keep to somewhere between 12 and 14, 12 and 15 days ahead, and keep the pre-grazing yield correct, they're 95% of the way there. Okay, so just moving on ever so slightly to the dairy targets, because we just said we'd split them out a little bit, because we tend to, on the dry stock side of the house, we would just want to focus on keeping it simple on the day on the days ahead. But we tend to, on the dairy side, tend to look at a little bit more, okay, because normally the stocking rate is a little bit higher, so there's a little bit more pressure on that weekly wedge, okay, and so again, John mentioned them yesterday, but we're going to have a quick look there now for a second on, I suppose, cover per livestock unit being the first one, okay, the farm cover, okay, and that difference between growth and demand, okay, because those figures tell us an awful lot about where our farm is at, or where our farm is going to in the coming week, okay. So again, we said just on that example wedge, farm cover 753, cover per livestock unit 209. Like that could be a typical wedge in the mid season, growth to 71. Okay, now the demand is probably a little bit low, but in general that wouldn't be something that we could see that during the year. So I suppose in the spring, okay, we're going to have a look at this from a spring, summer, and autumn, okay? So, in general, the first rotation in spring is normally in around 60 days, okay? So, it's always 2 months. So, in general, if farms turn out in early February, you're probably talking, 2 months, and rotation, depending on growth rate, and this is where PastureBase comes into it, depending on growth rate, a second rotation starting in early April. Heavier farms turn out where possible in later February and aim for a mid-April second rotation. And I suppose, what are the key targets we want to look for? So we go back to our wedge again. At this time of the year now, we'll be advocating there, and maybe people who are reading the Grass10 newsletter there yesterday, we had Derek Helene on there from County Galway, just had completed a spring budget. He has you know, he would target to have somewhere over 900, or sorry, somewhere in around between 900 and 1200, okay, in early February, okay. So this is where we would want people to be, okay, in terms of an average farm cover. All right. And he actually is in general a little bit behind where he'd want to be. Okay, he's probably about 150 behind that, in terms of he's probably going to end up somewhere between 920 and 930 in early February on his average farm cover, where he'd like to be a little bit higher, towards 1100. Okay, so so there's, you know, an opening farm cover, want to be there. We're at 753 there in that scenario. We'd want to be somewhere between 900 and 1200, depending on the stocking rate. Okay. Then along the way, there's different parameters to hit depending on how dry or heavy the farm is. But in general, you know, on a dry farm, we'd be looking to get 30% grazed in February, 2/3 grazed by Paddy's Day. Okay, so 66% grazed by Paddy's Day. And then the first rotation completed in early April. Again, on heavier soils, that's going to be later. Okay. But again, on heavier soil, you take the opportunity to graze when you can, and you're reliant heavily on having the grazing infrastructure correct. I suppose one of the key things that we always say, myself and John are always drilling into people, is, you know, especially if probably stock rates have gone up a little bit over the last years, a key point throughout the spring is to never let that average farm cover dip under 550 kilos, okay, at any point. And that normally happens in March, if you get a cold March, you know, and you know, the growth rates just aren't hopping, and there's big demands on some farms. Okay, so it's very important, and that's where it kind of comes back into that March, getting your grazings done, and keeping on track with maybe a spring rotation planner, which we'll talk about tomorrow, or a grass budget, because like at times throughout the spring, especially if there's a high demand. So if we've got a high demand here, low growth rates, like very easy, you could be taking 100 or 150 off your average farm cover every week. Okay, so, and then if we tank our average farm cover under 550, there's just too much of the farm in a position where it's struggling to get started. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of. Okay, so again, a few key points. We want to try and open between 900 and 1200, depending on the stocking rate. Hit your parameters along the way at your 30% graze or 66% graze, again, depending on whether you're a dry farm or heavy farm and stocking rates. But a key one there is not to let the average farm cover dip under 550. Okay. And so then in the summertime, okay, so as we said there, in this example here, the cover per livestock unit is a 209. Okay. So in general, over a summer, so if we came out to, either myself or John came out to a grass group, or came out to your group, we'd ask maybe, where's the cover per livestock unit at? Where's the average farm cover at? You know, we might have a quick look at where your pre-grazing yields are, and we get, from those couple of figures, we get a right good picture of where your herd, you know, where your herd is, where your grazing is at. And probably another thing there is to have a quick look at pre-grazing yield, is along with pre-grazing yield, is have a look at your post-grazing yield, because you'll tell very, very quickly, you know, what the clean outs are like, and we'll know very quickly whether the grass being grazed is too strong. Okay, so again, back to John mentioned it yesterday, 160 to 180 kilos of dry matter per livestock unit. And that's back to the simple point again, is that, say for instance, a cow was being offered 16 kilos of grass and say 2 kilos of meal. Okay, if you want to have somewhere between 10 and 12 days ahead at that'll be somewhere in around 180 kilos of dry matter per livestock unit. Okay, so if we have, you know, that 10 to 12 days ahead, days grass ahead, okay, on that dairying scenario, because there probably is a little bit more fertilizer going out, so we just don't need that bank of days ahead that may be on a dry, that extra 2 or 3 days that might need on a dry stock farm. But keeping in that you know, in that scenario is fairly good, you know, a fairly good guide for the middle of the season. Okay, so again, when we start seeing the cover per livestock unit, it's 209 here. When we start seeing that cover per livestock unit gaining up to 220, 230, and farmers not acting, you know, what happens then is we know we're going into too strong. We're going into too strong covers. Okay, and you know, milk solids, and this is the same in terms of, you know, the days ahead figure gaining to 20. Like, you know, we're losing out in terms of milk solids, but we're also losing out then on the dry stock beef sheep side of the house in terms of, you know, live weight gain. Okay, and also residuals. Again, on the average farm cover, it's, what was that, 700 and something there. The rule of thumb is that, average farm cover multiplied by 2 is our pre-grazing yield. Okay, so if we've 750, multiply it by 2, we're in around 1500, so we're nearly on the money there. All right. So if we're too high, we've stemmy grass, poor clean out, lower milk solids and weight gain. And if we're too low, on the average farm cover, we're running out of grass and we reduce the grass grown on the farm, because if we have an average farm cover of say 450, 500, there's just too much of that ground in that one leaf stage. Okay. It's going to take it an awful lot longer, to recover. And that's going to mean that, it's going to take a long to recover. So that means we're going to have more supplementation in the diet to recover that. Okay. So that's particularly important in that early, maybe that late, that we talked about, that average farm cover, that late spring, early summer. Okay. Maybe when growth rates are still a little bit variable, to keep that. And I suppose back to the pre-grazing yield again, and this is why, trying to keep it in 14, 1500, keep it on that on the money. The plant is at somewhere between 2.5 and the 3 leaf stage. Okay. Why do we need it there? Is because it's 80% leaf. Okay. And there's less than 10% of it, stem or dead material. So we know that in that regard, in that scenario, we're going to have leaf, high quality, very digestible feed for both dairy cows and, be it lambs grown off it, or a dairy calf to beef system, or be it a suckler cow system. We know we have quality grass there for the stock that's on the farm. Okay, so there are a few key things to look out for.
During that, sorry Joe, there, just on that, like during that period, I don't think people realize this. I don't know. They know all about that. They have to measure grass and they want to feed good quality grass, and like really from that mid-April period onwards till about mid-August, so in between your spring and your autumn rotation, there's about 120 days there. Okay, and we're trying to run 20-day rotations on average through that summer period. So 120 divided by 20 is 5 rotations. So if you want to write this down, the goal really between like when you finish your first rotation and by the time you start building up for the autumn, you should have 6 rotations complete in that time. Yeah, 6 into 120 goes, 20 into 120 goes 6 times. So there's 6 rotations there. There's about 120 days there, where the goal is for those 120 days, it's a pretty simple goal, is to get, no matter if it's cows, no matter if it's sheep, no matter if it's cattle, is to get them into covers of around 1,400 kilos of dry matter every day. And that's all the summer wedge is supposed to be for. If the holy grail is the pre-grazing yield, because that determines the quality. The quality then determines the energy available to the animal and the protein available to the animal, and that then determines the animal performance. So the more you can maximize there, and there's a lot of free grass growing during that period, okay? The weather, is sunlight, water, moisture is growing a lot of that grass. And it's our job to make the most of it, okay? There's a lot of talk about solar panels at the moment and putting solar panels on your roof. You're trying to capture energy and transform it into one form of energy into electricity. Well, on your farm, you're trying to capture the energy and transform it into energy in the form of grass and into energy in the form of milk and meat. And that's what the goal is of this.
Yep. So keeping that pre-grazing yield and just those couple of feet, and I think, just keep a focus on those couple of key figures. Don't get bogged down when you put in your first cover, which is an awful lot of information here. Just if you're on a dry stock beef and sheep scenario, where's my days ahead at? Where should it be? And then on the dairy side of it, where's my pre-grazing yield at? Is there a couple of paddocks too strong? Is my cover per livestock unit and my average farm cover showing me that? Is my cover per livestock unit at 230, 240? Okay, John Douglas told me that it should be 160, 280. Okay, something needs to be adjusted. Just focus on those few key things. All right. And then just lastly, on the two slides here before we move back to PastureBase. The autumn very much dependent on stock and rate, okay. But say for instance we take someone at 3 livestock units per hectare on a dairy scenario, okay. So on the milking platform. So what we're trying to do there is just extend the rotation from mid-August. So we were probably on a 20-day rotation. We're pushing it out to a 25. We're building a little bit of grass on the farm, so we can see they're up to a peak cover, bringing this back up to a 30-day rotation. Pushing our cover per livestock unit up to about 330 and having somewhere in around 1,000, 1,100. And then by the time we get up to mid-September, we're probably peaking at somewhere in around 1,100 of an average farm cover, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to grow grass at a period of the year which is cheap in August, okay? Extend the rotation to a period of the year where grass isn't that plentiful, okay? So we're still growing, we're getting milk from cheap grass, if that's what we want to say, okay? And the final point on that is, I say it an awful lot of the time, your decisions in the autumn dictate what you're going to have in the springtime. Okay, so how you manage that build up, how you manage your final grazing rotation in the year, okay, whether you build to a peak of 1150 on the 1st of October, you know, and you know, and manage that carefully, and you know, get a good bit of grass in the diet in the back end, but leave plenty for the spring. Or if you only build to maybe 750 or 800, and next thing you're running out of grass fairly lively, and you end up skinning the farm, and all of a sudden then you have no grass kept over the winter, and you have a low average opening average farm cover in the springtime. So autumn is the true start of your grassland management year. Okay, so I know obviously we're in the springtime now, but you know what, you know, that it's just a key point to remember. Okay, and this is just the last slide on this before we go back to PastureBase. This is just to show, and we had this on a webinar a while back, to show a farmer who was doing, you know, a poor enough job in terms of the cover per livestock unit, okay, and realized he needed to, and the pre-grazing yield was running nearly around 1900, okay, so he knew he was offside on that, okay. He was only completing 13 farm covers over the summer, okay, over that summer period from March to the late August, and his cover per livestock unit, remember we said this wanted to be between 160 and 180, was at 260, okay. The following year, cover per livestock unit was at 180, bang on the money where we wanted to be. And the reasons, he'd walked the farm 27 times, okay? And, you know, the pre-grazing yield was down to 50-90, probably could take a little bit more off it, but still huge improvements in a year, okay? And, you know, back to what John said earlier, you know, the more often that I walk my farm and measure grass, the more often my animals graze the correct grass. Okay, and this is the same. We had another example there of a person on the dry stock side of the house as well, who was the exact same graph as that, and it was just by a little bit more of attention to detail on the farm, walking the farm a little bit more. In general, you are walking the paddocks, or you're walking a proportion of the farm anyways, you know, in terms of setting up wires or whatever. So it's just going to that extra bit of that extra 15 or 20 minutes of detail, putting in the farm covers throughout the week. All right, and so that finishes me there, John. Okay, we might just take some of that information there we're after covering and maybe go back and just show it on the wedge. You're on mute there, John.
Yeah, sorry, super. Thanks very much, Joe. There's a couple of questions there, Joe. You might just when it comes to it, I'll give me a couple of minutes and then I'll come back to them. You might remind me there. All right.
Yeah.
So we're on the wedge that we created yesterday. Now I did bump up a few covers here just for the purposes of showing you, I suppose, making decisions on the wedge. So again, we're just looking at the visual of the wedge. You know, if we compare it to the red line, and we have a red line here that's set at 1,400 kilos of dry matter, that's the grass that we should be grazing in or around. Regardless of our stocking rate, regardless of what's going on the farm, we're trying to graze those covers as often as we can. So if we're just looking at that, at the red line, and looking at the wedge, well, then we're probably looking like, you know, most of the paddocks are above it. Some of them are above it by a good bit. So that would be an indicator that something needs to change before we even look at figures. But, you know, as I was pointing out yesterday, this red line can be set, and we can set it at different heights because we can edit it. And we can set it differently because we can increase the demand and increase rotation and stuff like that, and that will increase it. So but it won't give us, so we have to be careful not to just look at the wedge and say, oh, I have too much grass, because if that red line was in the wrong place because it was set wrong, well, then you'd be completely off. Okay, so we need to look at these figures as Joe is going through. So we can see here that if we imagine this is the summertime, okay, the springtime is kind of like, over the next couple of months, you're going to be really focused on getting out and getting grazing and getting through some area. And it's only really, I suppose, like on drier farms after that mid-March period that average farm cover needs to be really looked after, okay, in a lot of cases. Now, some farms are starting with a low cover this year. We've seen that from the Grass10 newsletter yesterday. We ran the report from PastureBase. There's 100 or so covers done so far this year, or in the last week. And indicators are coming back that some farms are low enough on grass supply this spring. So it is definitely worthwhile in the next week, before things get busy in the spring, to get out and get that opening cover done to see where you are, okay? But let's pretend now we're 3 or 4 months ahead and we're into maybe into May and June, July period, okay? So when things are really, growth is highest, it's at its peak. So if we were looking at the wedge, okay, and if I was out, or myself or Joe were out at a grass group that we run our grazing courses, and we see, the farmer that we go out to, this is his wedge for the last week. So he did his walk yesterday, and he's a farm cover of 831. His cover per livestock unit is 238. We'll just use a dairy example for a minute, and then we can switch over. And say his growth was 92, so a real growthy week. That's the type of week when temperatures are good, there's good sunlight, and there's still a lot of moisture in the ground, so things are growing well. Now, the demand for grass on the farm is 59, so just call it 60 kilos of dry matter per hectare, and the growth has been 92. Okay, so we know that the growth is 1.5 times actually the demand for grass, so things are getting ahead very quickly here on this farm. Okay, and the real killer is that if something is not done on this farm is going to start grazing a lot of heavy stemmy covers very quickly if there's not a decision made. And there was something put into a chat earlier on there, Joe, and it was about, how important is it to do that second walk over the summertime during the week, or walking every 5 days instead of 7 days, or maybe every 3 or 4 days. And really, I was just thinking about it when I was answering it. It's not. If you don't do the second walk, you'll never know which one caught you out, okay? But you probably will. There probably will be a time that you're going to get caught out, and it'll take a full rotation nearly to get the farm back right again, because you end up it takes you 4 or 5 days to realize you've made a mistake. Then you stay grazing maybe some of these covers that you shouldn't be grazing heavier for another 4 or 5 days. That's half a rotation gone, and then you spend maybe the next week or 10 days taking out paddocks and trying to fix it up, and maybe leaving a little bit of topping or pre-mowing to clean up paddocks to get them back right. So it is vital to, when the growth is high, to do a second walk that week. So my thing is, like, if your demand is at 60, if the growth goes over 70, I should definitely do probably a second walk at least in 5 days time. And if the growth is maybe over 80 or getting close to 90, I'd want to be out every 3 or 4 days. So that's my rule of thumb. Once the growth is above the demand by about 10 kilos or so, I'd definitely be on for doing a second walk in that week, or 3 in 2 weeks, as Joe was saying earlier. Okay, so what decisions do we need to make here? Well, if we make no decision, and I just want to show you this for a second, we have a button up here. It's called the projected planner. Okay, so if we click on the projected planner, so this is basically, we're looking ahead on the farm that if the growth rate stays the same, and if we don't make any decisions, this is what the farm is going to look like, and it's projected 7 days ahead. Okay, so we can see here the highest covers are up at 2,000. Okay, so that's a lot of stem in them swards, and they won't be grazed out that well if it's into, especially if it's into June and July, they won't be grazed out that well at that stage. And like following that rule of thumb, the average farm cover is nearly 1,000. Okay, so it's about half the pre-grazing yield. As I said, the growth remained the same. The cover per cow has gone from like 238 to 283, so nearly like another 4 or 5 days extra grazing for every cow on the farm. So things are like in an upward spiral, and the grass growth is getting out of control. So that's what we don't want. Okay, now we can always change the growth rates here. If the growth rate was going to drop, we can change that. But I'm going to come back into this page in a second. I want to go back to the wedge first. I just wanted to show you there what happens if we don't make a decision. Okay? And that sort of like a lack of decision in this scenario is a drop in like milk solids by 5% to 8%, is a drop of maybe 0.2 of a kilo, 0.3 of a kilo on cattle on a live weight gain. Or it could, like if you're grazing that sort of grass all summer with lambs, it could be the difference of finishing them like 2 to 3 weeks earlier. Okay? So it's worth a lot of money, no matter what scenario you're in.
Or just one other thing there, John, as well. That could be maybe where someone thinks that they have a pile of grass on the farm and they're on 3 kilos a meal and they pull to a kilo and the cows tank, they drop milk in the tank because the 3 kilos a meal is masking a quality problem at the top of the wedge. Okay, that's 18, 1900, 2000. Next thing you're trying to get those cows and heifers to nail that, to clean out that 2000 cover, and the tank tells you straight away. And then it's and then all of a sudden the meal is put back up to 3 or 4 kilos, and it sits there for the rest of the summer. When it wasn't the meal that was that was the problem. It was actually what was going down their throat that was the issue, So another thing to be aware of.
Yeah, like there is the cows are eating whatever we said, 18, 19 kilos of dry matter in the day. If 2 kilos is coming from meal, there's 17 coming from grass. So if there's an issue with animal performance, it's a good chance it's coming from the grass quality, not the meal. Okay? Because it's being outweighed by about 9 to 1 there in that scenario. So what we want to do here is we want to take out some paddock. So this paddock here has gone up near 1700. So it needs to be taken out, and we're just going to take it out one at a time to bring it back down into the target. So we want this figure here of 238 to be back down to that 160 to 180 region. So if I can just select this paddock here. Now there's 2 options. I can put in silage cut now or silage cut later, and I'll show you what to do. So silage cut now, if I put this paddock into silage cut now, it removes it off the wedge in terms of at the top of the wedge, and it places it back down at the bottom of the wedge. So it just puts it back down at 0. So it's like I've called the contractor, he's coming in, he's going to take out some paddocks now. I've mowed it down, he's going to take them out, and it's back to 0 again. So it doesn't really affect the rotation length. Okay, so that paddock will still be back ready for grazing within 2 or 3 weeks. And now if we look back at the figures here, your farm cover is 655 and cover per livestock unit is 188, and the pre-graze yield is back at 1500. So that's not actually too bad. Okay, now I suppose when you're trying to build up confidence, even making a decision to take out that paddock is a big step in the right direction. Now if you're coming in like if you know the next week is going to be high growth rate, okay, what we could do here is we'll just leave that paddock as is and go back into the projected planner to have another look at it and see what's happening. So even if the growth rate remains high, the farm cover is still going to build over the next week. So what I could do here is actually I might go out and take out another paddock. Just one more, and I'll run myself tight this week, and maybe I'll drop it closer to 160. Okay, so I'll go back down here and I'll put this to silage cut now, and I'll scroll back up. It's at 143. Now that's running a fair. That's probably running it too tight. In fairness, it probably is. So we wouldn't like to go even for a week or two of high growth. You could maybe push it to 150. Getting down to 143 and a farm cover of 500 is very low. Okay, so that's probably too low. But if we just projected just to see where we'd end up next week with it, and again, grass grows grass. So if we've dropped cover, it will drop growth rate. So you can see there, it isn't, it's running things too tight. So what in that scenario there is you'd probably take out one paddock, so your cover per cows go back to 188. And leave it at that, and then again the following week pick it up. Okay, pick up and see could you might have to take out another paddock the following week, or in 10 days time you might have to take out something else. So what I want to do is put that back to grass, and I want to show you now. I'll put them all back to grass. What happens if I take it out for cut later? So you can see here at the moment that the demand is 60 and the stocking rate is about 3.5. What happens if we take it out for silage cut later is that it removes it from the wedge completely. Okay, so that paddock has disappeared altogether off your wedge. It's not showing. And your demand has now moved up to 66 and the stocking rate is 3.9. Okay, so what a lot of farmers did back last May time, and even farmers who are used to grass measuring, maybe they hadn't come across this situation in a couple of years, especially in my side of the country in the east where things get dry. There hasn't been too many times where grass was really, really abundant. Like we had high growth rates of maybe 80s, 90s, 100s for two or 3 weeks, and some places. So a lot of grass. What ended up happening, paddocks that should have been cut out as surplus bales, the grass was really growing that quick that guys actually just pulled them off their wedge altogether and leave them go for first cut silage. So now what's happened is a paddock that could have been cut out at 14, 15, 16, 17, 100, something in around that region, has now been taken out and is maybe going to be cut in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time with first cut silage. So grass grows grass. So those covers, by the time another 3 weeks comes around, those covers of grass they might be up at 16, 1700. They could be up at 3,500, 4,000, depending on the growth. Okay, depending on how much fertilizer and if it's reseeded, etc. There's an awful lot of grass in them. So to cut them, 2 or 3 weeks after you're going to graze them, and then expect them to be back in rotation again for grazing within 20 days, is not going to happen. They're going to take maybe 4 weeks to come back ready for grazing again, because you're taking a heavy crop off them. And not only that, now, so you haven't just skipped them for for one grazing as such. You've now missed out on the grazing this time. Your grazing when you cut them for silage would actually be another sort of grazing around that time, and you'll miss another grazing about 2 or 3 weeks after that. So you've actually missed out on grazing grass. And farmers this year, they ran themselves tight in early June by not cutting out paddocks early enough. Okay, they let things go too strong, and they left themselves tight. Okay, so don't be pushing up stocking rate too high. Like, I suppose that's a good question. Like, where should your stocking rate be? And it really depends on what your farm is capable of growing. Every farm is going to be different. As a general rule of thumb, I would say, like in the east of the country, stocking your farm at like 3.2 to 3.5 or something like that over the summertime is probably a safer bet, because if you're up closer to 4 for like 3 or 4 weeks, there's a good chance you're going to be running yourself tight, and like any extra silage that you get to make in first cut, you're going to end up feeding some of it back anyway. So it's like stock it a little bit lower. But there's other parts of the country, and even within regions in the east, that farms can grow well even in drier times. So it's really farm specific, okay, with that. But that's basically how you make your decisions on the wedge in terms of removing paddocks, adding in paddocks, taking out paddocks. If that's all down as one mob. So another thing, like as Joe was talking about there, like we can change intake. So like let's say for instance the cows were being fed 14 kilos of grass and just 5 kilos of meal, okay, or something to that effect. Now what this will do is it'll drop your demand back to 50, okay, because there's more meal being fed. That displaces grass, and therefore your demand is lower. But so say this was your situation, okay, and your farm cover was 830 and your cover per cow was 238, which in a dry stock scenario means you're 17 days ahead. If I wanted to reduce that meal, I'll say I'd go, I have too much grass there, I might pull back the meal there to 3 kilos, okay, or even if you just want to just show for dramatics here, we'll go back to 2 kilos, okay. And some farmers think by pulling back meal by a couple of kilos, it'll fix all their problems. It'll get back on top of the grass. Well, you can see here, like it's just gone back to the way it was. Your demand's gone from basically 50 back up to 60, but the growth is 90 here, So it's going to have no effect really on the grass, on keeping on top of grass. It requires a bigger decision, okay. Some people might have like heifers on a grazing block. They could pull a paddock out for heifers to graze a paddock or something like that if it was gone a bit strong or something, to that effect. But generally it's all about removing the surpluses, and it's not looking at these paddocks. Don't look at them as silage fields. They're not silage fields, they're grazing fields, and there's surplus grass, and if I don't fix it, I'm going to end up in a mess. And that's the way to look at them. So just get them fixed as soon as possible, okay? And that's what we have to do. So there was a question, I suppose, if we look at things the other way, maybe I'll pull out those two paddocks again.
Yeah, John, just that one there, that question there, I suppose, how would you tweak rotation, if at all, when heading into a dry spell? And I suppose, look at, since 2018, like we've been looking at a few farms, and like, some farms have nearly been in a drought 4 out of the last five years, like, especially,
Yeah.
well, definitely 3 out of the last 5 years over your side of the country.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So this is a big one. Like when it comes to taking out paddocks, especially in drier areas, there is a lot more hesitancy to do it, because it's like, geez, if I cut them back, there might be no, I might, the growth could drop next week, and I might have no grass. But the way I answer that is like, okay, you have surplus on your farm right now, and things are growing well. The sooner you react to that, and the sooner you fix that and get back on track, you'll have that done before the growth rates start to drop. But if you hold off a week or 10 days and let that farm cover, that maybe was 800 build up to 900, and then growth does start to drop, now you've left with your covers of nearly 2,000, things are drying out, so they're all going to stem, and you're left with poor quality, and you do have some feed, but you're going to spend a whole rotation when things come, when it rains again, you're going to spend a whole rotation topping and pre-mowing to get quality back right on farm. So what I would do is maybe carry, push that cover per cow, from 180 up to 200 or 210 or something like that. If it's a bit drier, I wouldn't mind that, okay? But if it's up at 230 or 240 per cow, and you're holding on to that because you're afraid that it might not rain, that's the wrong attitude to have. You need to go out and take out paddocks still. Like at the end of the day, taking out a paddock or two, it's only going to cause you to feed silage a day or two earlier if it comes to that. That's all really you're doing. But yet there's a big fear of doing it, of running out of grass. Okay? So I'd be very much, if you want to push rotation it out from 20 days to 25 days and, hold the grass on the farm, that's what we would do. So in a dry time, if this could be typical of a dry time. Now maybe the stocking rate, I'm just going to lower the stocking rate a little bit. Maybe we'll bring it back to 60 cows, okay? But this could be typical of what your farm might look like in a dry time. So your covers are getting a bit light, and that red line, a lot of the paddocks are starting to drop below them. Your farm cover 630, you're actually covered with cows isn't too bad, but you're trying to hold on to that. And we'll say your growth, just for argument's sake, is 40 or something, 35 or 40, and your demand is 53. Okay, so in that scenario there, if your growth is low, okay, you can use growth and demand to hold average farm cover, and that's what I'd be telling my groups to do over summertime. If your farm cover, like, hold it above 600 if you can, so hold it there at that position, okay? Because a lot of times, sometimes we get a lot of green droughts where the growth rates are just low over a prolonged period, but it's not, you might be getting some bits of rain just to keep things ticking over a little bit. So you're not running, the farm cover. It's not like what happened last August where everything just disappeared off the farm. It's actually being held a little bit. So in that scenario there, it could be a case of putting in, maybe increasing the meal to 3 kilos, putting in 4 kilos of silage, and dropping your demand. You're trying to drop your demand back down to about 40 there. So where's it gone to now? Oh, I never decreased grass. So yeah, we're trying to drop demand back down into around 40 to match the growth rate. Okay, so that scenario there, look, I've put in an extra kilo of meal, I put in 4 kilos of silage, and that could be anything, whatever you want to put in, and that's reduced my demand. That's going to match my growth, and I'll hold my farm cover. And I just do that week on week. I'm actually walking the farm to establish a growth rate. Okay, or you could do the other way, which is sort of like rotation length. So push the rotation length out to 25 days, and that's breaking the farm down into 25 areas basically, and grazing one section every day. Okay, so that would be my tips on managing grass in the dry spell. And I'm a member of Grass10 now for the last 4 or 5 years, so I've been through a lot of those summer droughts in this period. And as far as I can tell, you still have to make the decisions. You still have to take out the paddocks. Maybe you leave a little bit extra, But if you don't, you end up in a bigger mess afterwards. Okay, and the cows don't really appreciate grazing a lot of stemmy swards either if you don't take them out. So there was one other thing we are going to do, maybe, Joe, just on the mobs, wasn't there, as well?
Yeah, the mobs. Yeah, there was another actually question in there on the mobs, but I'd say, John, just for that example, maybe stick in maybe sheep and lambs on maybe one mob, and maybe heifers or something on another mob.
Again, I'm just clicking the green bars to get the mobs. If anyone missed yesterday, you click on the bar and I can change the mob there within that. So if I've done that there, I can, say, put these sheep into mob 2, and so we'll say we put in 180 sheep, okay, and they're lactating ewes. Grass intake is 1.6. So I'm just going to up that to, let's say, 3.5 kilos. We're pretending it's the middle of the year, okay, and they're on mob 2. So if I just wanted to look at mob 2, I can look at mob 2 here as a separate unit. So within the farm, I can look at mob 2. So my demand for grass here would say is very high. Now my growth was high, but say I was expecting growth to drop or something like that, I might have to. I'm going to just look at mob 1 now and see what way it's set up. Okay, the demand is much lower here in mob 1, and the growth is still high. So I have more grass basically on this side of the farm with whatever stock. It doesn't matter. We'll just, yeah, it's down at spring milkers, but it could easily be beef animals, suckler cows, whatever. It could be whatever. So what I could do here is I could simply click, well, I know the cows are going in here next, but I might give this one over. I might swap it to the sheep, okay? And I'll save that as mob 2. So that gets my cover per cow back down right on this scenario, and my days ahead is back down to 14 on this scenario. And when I go over to mob 2, then I'm allowing myself, I've decreased my demand. My days ahead was actually, I can't remember what it was before that. It was lower than that anyway. So I'm after increasing my days ahead on this side of the farm. All right. So that's just the way that if you have different mobs, that it might necessarily be about taking out paddocks, but your first port of call might be, well, is there another group of stock that are short on feed that I could swap that surplus over to? Okay.
Yeah, and just as a question in there, John, just from Debbie, in terms of a mixed beef enterprise, can you leave them all on one single mob? And like, I suppose you can, Debbie. There's no issue. We would prefer to leave them all on one mob if they're close by, or they're all on one unit, and you have, say, weanlings, suckler cows, the whole lot. Yes, correct. Leave them all on one, because in that scenario, you're looking for one figure at the end of the week, and that's your days ahead. Okay, even though there's different groups of animals there, if you're still keeping the days ahead correct, that's what we're looking out for.
Exactly, yeah. So it is actually simpler to manage it all as one unit, and then if there's a surplus on the farm, you can remove that surplus wherever you want. Okay, but some people like to have it like, well, these group of paddocks are fixed to this group of animals, and it just depends, maybe whatever way the farm is laid out as well. So it's all going to be relevant to that.
It could be like an out, maybe if there's an out farm 5 kilometers away, or 10 or 15 kilometers away, that that you might have the two mobs in.
Yeah,
that's kind of where it tends to work best. Like,
so if I wanted to, sorry, I'm just going to go back to taking out this paddock here first of all, and I'm just looking at everything as a whole on the farm. If I go to projected planner, I just want to show where people can update the growth rate. So that the growth rate that was on the farm last week is carried through to the farm for the following week when it projects the planner. However, the paddocks that have been grazed during that week, which PastureBase works off the demand that you have on PastureBase for your livestock, they'll basically tell you how much area, how many paddocks should be grazed by that stage. Well, those paddocks that are grazed, they give them a lower growth rate, so they're about half the farm growth rate, okay? So that's why the growth here is 86 and not 92 like it was on the previous page, Okay, there is a sum there working away there. But what we can do here, say you're predicting that growth rate to go back down to 60 for the week ahead. So we can put down 60, and we can see what it looks like then. You know, so you're not too bad there at that. It's gone down to a little bit, what, 140. It's a little bit tight, but to be honest with you, I think some of those paddocks, when it predicts only a half a growth rate on the ones grazed, it does tend to underestimate them a little bit. So I'd be happy enough that that'd probably be closer to 650, and that'd be up at 150 to 160 for the week ahead if the growth dropped. But that's where we're trying to get people to look at their wedge, use the projected planner, and there's predicted growth rates on the Grass10 newsletter every week. They're on the Farm and Weather every Sunday, and they're on the PastureBase homepage. So use them as guides for your grass grazing for the week ahead to see what way things are happening. But you should know yourself, like, once there's plenty of moisture, plenty of heat, there's fertilizer there, things are going to grow well. All right. If things are getting dry, or it's going to be a wet week and not much sunshine, things will slow down. But that in general, that's what we're basing our decisions on. So, and all
John,
this,
just a quick question. Another quick question there. Just if you have heifers following cows on, are they kept on the same mob? And I suppose in that scenario, yes, they would be kept on the same mob. But what I would say about heifers following cows, and it does tend to happen on farms, but the reason why heifers are following cows is because there's grass left behind, and that's normally it's normally maybe from pre-grazing yields being too high. And again, it's back to what we were on about, maybe on the dry stock side of the house, maybe growing 3 weeks, grazing 3 days, and maybe even on the dairy side of the house, we're trying to bring that 3 days down to maybe a day and a half paddocks or 2 days paddocks. If you have heifers coming back in after cows have been in the paddock for a day and a half, and their heifers are spending 2 or 3 days in it, next thing that grazing that grazing event has taken 5 days, so we're losing grass growth. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I would, Joe, I would nip, like, sort of nearly nip that in the bud there. Like, if that's going on, really, that needs to change. That needs to stop. I'd rather allocate 1 or 2 paddocks to heifers and leave them rotate around 1 or 2 paddocks, like split the paddocks, because obviously these paddocks are set up for a big group of cows. Maybe you're only going to have, like, if you have 100 cows, maybe what, you have 20 heifers, 25 heifers, or something like that. They're not going to be able to eat through the same amount of area. So 1 or 2 paddocks would maintain them. Split the paddocks into 4 again. Use the water drinkers, whatever, and do it that way. And don't be letting the covers build up on those cows. Make the decisions before it gets too strong. See, you could get very careful, like, where you get into the mindset there. Oh, it's all right, the heifers will eat it. But like, there's 25 heifers coming into maybe a 2 hectare paddock. They could be there for a week. Try to clean it up, and they still mightn't have it clean.
and they're only going to nip the fresh stuff anyways.
That's all they're going to do. So
yeah,
I would completely knock that on the head and make a decision this year. I'm not going to do that. Okay.
that you're going to set up a certain area of the farm very, very well with strip wires, and buy an extra 3 or 4 reels and pigtail post this year, and put them on maybe 24, 36, 40, even 48-hour wires for the summer, 2-day wires. And
I understand 1 or 2 paddocks. If it's only 1 or 2 paddocks over the summertime, the heifers tend to be there. It's not the end of the world. But if that's a routine thing that's going on the farm, that needs to stop.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to show you as well there, I suppose, on the farm map there, just before we finish up, we went through the map on Monday, okay? But if we go to the map here, we can click on the grass tab here, and the grass tab here actually gives the cover on the paddocks, okay? I just wanted to show people that. So obviously, if I had all my paddocks set up on here, I'd see the different covers, and they'd come up in different colors. So those paddocks are all sort of between 500 and 1,000, so they're all the same green color. But if they go over 1,000, they get to a different color. If they're lighter than 500, they go to a different color. So if you've other people working on the farm, you can very quickly export that outline to PDF, and then you could print off that map. And if you have other people working, they have an idea of what grass covers are on the farm and where to graze next. So I just wanted to highlight that there, Joe. Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. And there's just one final question there, about, clover swards and I suppose, knowing where they are on the wedge. And look at, we're out of time today, but we will be covering that, Michael, on Friday. If you want to join us there, we'll be showing how to, how the clover swards look. I suppose they look differently on your wedge, so that you can target them when you're going round, if that's all right.
Yeah, and in terms of pre-grazing, Neil, like it's not up to PastureBase to tell you to graze, clover paddocks and lighter covers, and it's a great awareness to have, to know that you need to do it, but it's really up to your decisions. And if it's only really in the early days of those clover paddocks that they're any different, maybe the first year you have to treat them a bit differently and go in a bit lighter. But again, the more you walk the farm and the more you are on top of what's going on in the farm, the easier that is. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Are we good? We're good on that then, Joe?
We're good. We're finished. Yeah, that should be us. So
we would just want to maybe just highlight the grazing courses. So this is again the Grass10 section of the web page. If you go into grazing courses, we've been running Grass10 courses and grazing courses for the last 4 years, but we're actually enrolling now and listing for this year for new people to join the courses. Okay, so some people, you might be joined up to an existing course where there's people measuring already, which is great because you get to borrow on all their experiences and learnings for the last few years, or start a new course depending on the demand in certain areas. But these courses, like if you're really serious about getting good on your grassland management, if you're really serious about wanting to make more money from your grasslands and more money out of your farm, saving, being more efficient with fertilizers and saving money on your nutrients that you're buying into the farm, and getting good with clover as well. We're also looking at clover. Well, there's no better group probably than the Grass10 groups to do that in, because we're meeting on farm. It's very practical. You're with a group of like-minded farmers. You have the expertise, I suppose, from us from Grass10 to guide you along the way. And we meet regularly throughout the year, about maybe 6 times, 8 times throughout the year, depending on the demands for the group. And so if you're interested in that and joining a group like that, enter your details on this and express interest, and we'll get back to you in the next couple of weeks. Perfect.
Okay. Yep.
So we'll wrap it up with that tomorrow. And so tomorrow, Denver Joe, we're back with the rotation planners and doing a grass budget. So we're moving into some higher level stuff that would be very good, I suppose, for the springtime, for people to gain a better understanding of spring grazing management, I suppose.
And a little bit on the soil sampling as well. We're covering off. So if you've clicked, you're doing soil samples now, how you can link them into the paddocks, and that links into fertilizer. So as John says, we're moving on. It's becoming a little bit more advanced now. But once again, look, thanks a million. Jeez, we had big numbers on again today. Loads of questions. So thanks a million. The recordings will be up on the webinar subsection. And look, we'll see you at 1 o'clock again tomorrow. Thank you.
Talk to you then. Bye bye.